Nei ranga mihi kia koutou katoa, koutou no konei, te atiawa, Ngāti toa. Nā Ngāti toa tēnei I poipoia, I tipu ake au I konei, no reira mihi atu kia koutou katoa, pai te hoki mai, ahako te makariri, tika tāhau e pāna ki te hau, kia pupuhi te hau, kia ora ai te iwi. No reira, ko hikurangi te maunga ko waiapu te awa ko Ngāti Porou te iwi. No ana tēnei wahine ki tūranga nui ākiwa, anei he waiata nā tētahi hoa tino rongo nui, Macy. I give you a name from your ancestors, so you may know who you are. I give you a name from your pepeha, so you may know where you're from. Te pū, te more, te weu, te aka, te rea, te waunui, te tipuranga, if ever you lose your way. Whisper your name. For those that don't know who I am a psychiatrist. Before that I was a psychiatric nurse. Before that I was an amateur musician here in Porirua, Wellington. And before that I was a teenage mum. I have been fighting, like many of you, fighting to be able to exist as a Māori and walk in many spaces and for it to be okay to be Māori, and it's not. So here we go. How is neurodiversity interpreted in different cultures and through different worldviews? How are we even here talking about neurodiversity, a term, a word that comes from somewhere else, when we haven't even acknowledged the impact of racism on us as a people? And it worries me, Māori mā, that when we think about cultural analogies and metaphors to align with neurodiversity, that all we're doing is using our reo and our mātauranga to afford a space for a term that isn't ours. But what I don't want you to hear me say is that if it suits you, then it's important. But for too long, what suits me and my ancestors has not been afforded any equality in space, design, development, funding and delivering. All I want, which I know many, if not all of you want, is good outcomes for all of us. But for too long, we've been thinking that we are fair, that we are kind and considerate to everyone and treat everyone the same. But the outcomes don't show that. So although we think we're helping others, actually institutional racism is in nearly every report in every sector, which means the people that need to change is us. Oh, I got a kilda. Switching, it was cold before, I didn't want to take my jacket off. I knew I'd get hot. All right. So I'm going to read, so that, because I've only got a little bit of time, I don't like to read. I'd like to challenge you, Pale, about the reading in great minds, because our ancestors didn't read, but my goodness, they could do more tea that would be like 73 verses long and know all of them, and they were a walking encyclopedia, and I just happened to marry one. But fortunately, he can read. In fact, he reads and writes better than I do. You see, whānau, systems of privilege can socialise and indoctrinate us into a series of beliefs about what we're entitled to and what kind of treatment we can expect in the world. Every waking day of our life, doesn't it make you cry? Every waking day of our life, These messages will indoctrinate us into a way of being. And you know what? Ever since the 1400s, since the doctrine of Christian discovery, which is the Whakapapa of racism, if you don't know about it, please learn. Ever since then, it has become a foundation block for all of modern systems that we now understand, that shape our world. They still exist now, and even though we have collectively developed our frontal lobe, collectively, we've become great citizens, understanding that people of the same sex can marry each other, to rid ourselves of conversion therapy as a thing. We have grown up so much, but there is still so much to do. We, whānau, are sitting in an education system, an academic system, and even our science systems are deeply rooted in racist history that's never really been confronted, and we have to confront it. But we are not a society that likes to be in the same space of people we disagree with. And that is our transformation. I saw that. Transforming Aotearoa means creating space, going in knowing that we might disagree, going in knowing that we will feel uncomfortable, and going in knowing that when we leave, we might still disagree. But instead what we're doing is separating from the dominant cohort and finding another identity for ourselves. And what happens is we exist in different worlds and different paradigms, and we never come together. I heard the term bicultural shared today, but we don't come together to disagree. And we hide under the pariro of manaakitanga to make sure that we're not allowed to get angry. And I'm angry. Kia ora. Mahi Atua is a kaupapa that I developed in the mid-90s, and it's no longer an I thing. In fact, it wasn't then. On a land that Ngāti Porou gifted to improve the health of all people, I grew up as a young nurse in a Māori mental health service called Te Whare Māori. I went to Porirua Polytech that then became Whitireia Polytech. First of all, an admin worker, because the only thing that made me want to learn is the fact that I was hapu and excited about being a mum at 17. I was ecstatic, but all of you looked at me like it was a bloody virus. And it wasn't okay. Teenage pregnancy had become a social construct that was not accepted. I don't know if that was neurodiversity, I don't know, I'm not really sure. But when I was there, we were encouraged. In fact, we were the first nursing cohort to have 20% of the exam based on cultural safety. And so I got inspired about my Māoritanga. And I absolutely loved these Māori ways of knowing. And so I went to Whitireia to do a course, Te Tohu Mutunga Kore. And I learnt my reo, and there I learnt these pūrākau, I te reo, not just in English, but in Māori. Sometimes I had no idea of the depth of the words. Kura still meant school to me. I had no idea that it was this treasure, this beautiful word that had amazing depth, tikanga. And I went back to my nursing job, and that's all I did. Shared pūrākau. Pūrākau after pūrākau after pūrākau. And it was powerful. Years later, when I became a medical doctor, I knew I was going into psychiatry to gain power, and Mahi Atua evolved. We created a service with a lion's share of Fit for Future funding called Te Kuwatuata, another atua of Tāwhiri, another sibling of Tāwhiri, Māti and Tāne. Some of those atua you will be familiar with. One of Rangi and Papa's children. Thank you for mentioning them in the whai kōrero. Thank you for mentioning them, Pale. They are so important to us. And so the three principles for Mahi Atua, which has evolved, we have grown these services by privileging mātauranga Māori to practitioners, because it's not the whānau that need to change, if we are an institutionally racist system, then it is us that must change. And many of you will not feel comfortable in the knowledge that I'm going to share now. So I'm going to share a story to you because I thought it very relevant when we're thinking about diversity. You see, the coming of the 3 baskets and the 2 Maori stones brought about an era known as Te Ao Marama. This is a Māori epistemology story. This is where our Māori paradigm and all the knowledge that we have sits. It starts here. So sit back, notice yourself when I say words and things that you don't understand or you might disagree with. Pay attention to yourself because you are the best researcher of your experience. And is that experience stopping you from allowing our mātauranga to exist? Let's have a listen. You know, all of this brought with it all the knowledge required to facilitate custodianship of this new world that all of the Atua had fought so hard to arrive at. And as Pale talked about, they needed a plan, they needed purpose. And so the children of Rangi and Papa agreed that the world they created within themselves needed te ira tangata, humans, to inherit and care for Te Ao Marama. That's why we came about, to care for our whenua, to care for our moana. Hine ahu one. Each Atua in their own way busied themselves trying to create this human they needed. But for much of them, their attempts were unsuccessful. The diligent characteristics of Tāne was to persevere beyond failure. And as they learned from the journey toward their baskets, they learned to reflect and adjust, therein limiting the risk of failure repeating. From all the attempts to create the humans came many beings. However, those beings were still extensions of the Atua themselves, so still part of the natural environment. Think about that. Mahi Atua is always about applying the pūrākau to our context. We are trying to transform, but we're sharing what we are right now, what we know. And what we're likely to do is create an extension of ourselves, not transformation. For example, Tāne Mahuta, the Atua of the forest, coupled with Ruru Tangiako and Pā Whakahara, who begat Akeake and Ake Rautangi, trees. So it's not that what you are creating is bad, because from this era came trees. Tāne coupled with Pākoti and Hunga and begat varying species of harakeke. With Haere Awa, who begat Takahe and Pūkeko, birds. Try as Tāne might, no humans were created. Tangaroa begat fish and amphibians. Haumia Tikitiki begat unga unga and koka. Dihorangi, Atua of rain, begat ice and snow, and the same was happening for the other Atua. Multiple attempts created many beings, but not ira tangata. Tāne compared this to when they flooded in water, when they tried to separate the parents. There was water. Tāne thought there would be light, but Tāne was wrong. It flooded with tears of grief. You know what they did then? They went to their eldest sibling, Uru, who had eons before disconnected from the change, couldn't cope, disconnected. But every time the Atua was struggling, Tāne knew to go to Uru, the most disconnected, to seek wise counsel. And Tāne remembered this and thought, I need to seek wise counsel again. And they went there. Uru explained to Tāne that what was needed was te ira tangata, the human element, and it only existed within the uha. And that was te ira wahine, a female gene, which Uru explained. E kore koe e whai I tāu e kimi ai, I tāu e moi ai, kāre e ai te ira atua, ka hanga anō I a koe I te atua. Hoi no, ko tērā e kimi ana koe, kei te uha o tō tāua kōka I kura waka. Tāne was to seek the uha, the ira wahine, at kura waka, which is the pubic region of Papatūānuku, named kura waka from the staining of Rangi and Papa's blood when the limbs were cut by their children during the separation in their quest for shifting, for change. After talking with Uru, the disconnected eldest, Tāne journeyed to kura waka. Oh, I'm looking at Hauiti. This is a Ngāti Porou version of the truth. Just saying. Tāne journeyed to kura waka. I know Ngāti Tō, Te Atiawa, they have kura waka. I know this. And informed the other siblings of the advice, purpose, destination, and plan. From on high, you observed favourably and supportively. By the time they had arrived at kura waka, even Io was willing to support Tāne's quest. Tāne commenced the heaping up of soil and the forming of what would become the first ira tangata, the first human. As this creation revealed itself, many of the other siblings started to actively play a part and make physical contribution to this creation, following are some of the contributions and the atua responsible for them. Tū Ramaramanuku formed the puku, Taepa formed the womb, Rua Taumata and Tangai Waho formed the throat, Uepoto the mouth and Tāne Waho the tongue. Rongotu Waho gave the lips, Tamate Uira, Tāwhiri Mātia formed the lungs, Tū Kopua left the lungs moist, Punaweko gave the head hair, and Hurumanu gave the pubic hair. Tūpai gave the bones, Peketua gave the skin, Tū Matakaka gave the nose, Tū Mātaunga and Akaka Matua gave the muscles, nerves, veins, and sinews. Tū Matahuki, Tū Matahauiri gave the kidneys and the liver. Roiho and Roake gave the brain, Haipuru and Haimatua gave the skull, Uruao gave the eyes, and Ao Kapua gave the whites of the eyes, and Uru Te Ngangana gave the power of sight. The following Atua contributions to the first human are specific female parts of the human anatomy and are as follows. Tū Matatawera formed the mons pubis, Mohi formed the labia majora, and Peketua gave the skin for that part. Te Ku Watawate and Uruao gave the labia minora and the skin for that part. Uenuku Tāwhana I Te Rangi gave the vagina, a very important part of the human anatomy. Te Ihorangi gave the cervix. Rongo Whakate and Uepoto gave the clitoris and its sensitivity. Te Whaia gave the pudenda malibria. Toroi Waho gave the uvula, and Tāne Mahuta gave the fertility, and as stated above, Taepa created the womb. Io Matua Kore gave the blood, spirit, and life force, which was delivered to this new being by Rehua, who also delivered thoughts, ideas, and the many mind states contributed by the many whatukura from the many realms. It is important to note that all of these components, excluding the spirit, life force, thoughts, and the mind, are the physical aspects of human beings. Because it is not Tāne alone who created the first woman, the first human, they collectively named this new being as Hine Ahu One, woman shaped from soil. As much as Hine now possess physical features, they needed the power of function, and they are referred to as Te Hiringa Matua, Te Hiringa Tipua, Te Hiringa Tawhitorangi, the natural powers of creation, procreating, parenting, and growth. For example, in gifting the lungs, Tāwhiri Mātia also gave breath to fill the lungs. Roiho and Roake gave the brain, but Ranginui contributed the mind. Haumea Tikitiki gave the ears, and Rongomai Tahanui and Rongomai Taharangi gave the hearing, and they also come under Rongoma Tāne. All of the many characteristics of humans also came from all of the Atua. The ultimate power of Hine Ahu One's reproduction was also inherited from the Atua. But unlike the physical forms coming from the Ranginui descent line, the powers of reproduction came through the Papatūānuku descent line, All of these lines descend from Io, but the Papatuanuku line is as follows. Io beget te kore, who beget te pō, who beget te hā, who beget te pū, who beget te weu, who beget te more, who beget te aka, who beget te rea, who beget te ahunga, who beget te aponga, who beget te kuniiti, who beget te kunirahi, who beget pōpoko nui, who beget tamaku, and pōpoko nao. Tamaku the mātāmua, the elders beget Papatuanuku and pōpoko nao. The mātāmuri beget Hine Awawa, who beget Hine Parauri, who coupled with the Taina of Ranginui, Tā Puhikura, and they beget Whai Tuarangahua, who passed on to Hine Ahuone the power to reproduce. It is told through Whai Tuarangahua's descent came the power to procreate, which makes sense because her descent from Te Kore is also through the descent of Mother Earth, where lies the female element. As mentioned, the contribution to Hine Ahuone from Io was the soul and the life force. All that was needed now to bring life to the earth was the earth-formed maiden was for Tāne to breathe life into Hine Ahuone. Tāne knew that Hine Ahuone needed to be greeted into Te Ao Marama. So Tāne pressed noses to Hine to breathe ha into her. Hine coughed and sneezed, and Tihei Mauriora, Hine Ahuone, came to life, and the first human in Te Ao Marama came to be. I feel that. I don't know if you do, but we have been so disconnected. Imagine if that's what we were taught in school. Imagine where our neurons would travel. For all the women and men, for all those people who are agender, for everybody who have something identified as problematic with their way of being, their way of thinking, their behaviour, to all those struggling to be understood, issues that disconnect them from interacting with this world in a meaningful way, to all those who are lost, those who are grieving over missed opportunities and worried about their place in the world. It is important to know that these parts of us and their functions were ultimately gifts from our earlier ancestors. This underlines the importance of Whakapapa. Knowledge of the Atua who gifted these taonga to first woman can guide us into a space of creating a different connection, a spiritual connection, a meaningful connection, an everlasting connection. We can engage in rituals and ceremonies to help us make sense of our existence, to find meaningful connections, to carve a place for us in this world, to signal to ourselves, to our children, to our ancestors, that our connection is eternal. I presented this knowledge on purpose. I sat at medical school every day and had no idea what they were talking about, but knew it was important in order to transform me, to believe in me, to overcome the struggles that I had inherited from the process of colonization. Thank you for listening to this very important story. As you listen to the discussions over the next couple of days, please stay curious. A Māori custom story is the Hina Tore. From that story, Noho Tatapu, where Uepoto, one of the siblings, chased the Hina Tore. And from that story, because they took a risk, Whiro, another sibling who wanted it to stay the same, cursed Uepoto with goosebumps. But it didn't stop Uepoto. Uepoto continued toward this variant of light. Please know, if there is no light sparking from my kōrero, then I want you to pay attention to why it's sitting like that. Why? Where did you learn to stay where you are? What's stopping you from delving in to being curious about our story? Because it's going to be the transformation. So please stay curious about the whakapapa of the knowledge that is shared. Whose knowledge is it? Who's being privileged? And when we're trying to promote mātauranga Māori, is there an undercurrent that continues to perpetuate institutional racism, where experts will move into positions of privilege without having to consider the implications, the impact that colonisation has had on all of us in Aotearoa? My husband and I are the manukura for Te Kurahuna. Our kaupapa is Mahi a Atua. We provide training to help you shift. We have 3 principles. I just did the first principle. I indigenized your space with this story. The second principle, I tried to encourage. Ka mā te ariki, ka mā te tauira. I'm a student in your presence because I don't know how this landed for you. You are the expert that will be able to scan what's going on for you. You are the researcher of yourself, and if you don't give me feedback about what's going on and we keep that space open, then I can't learn from you. And we can flip that around as well. Ka mā te ariki, ka mā te tauira. We are all each other's teachers and all each other's students. And the third principle, hongi hongi te whaiwhaia, embrace and inhale the unusual. And I missed the hongi ceremony. So I say to you all, let's do the spiritual hongi and hongi the unusual and find out where it lands and have this shared vision of us thriving in the future, because racism is impacting all of us. Because we are not prioritised, and we can't write the word prioritise Māori because of the politics in which party will win. Crazy. Politicians are looking after our white fragility. Politicians are looking after our idea that we are progressive, we're learning reo. It can't stop there. You must know that all of the ideological concepts that you believe in, that you can't even recognise, are contributing to the perpetuating of racism. I implore you to hongi hongi te whaiwhaia, because we need to grow a culture of feedback. If we create a culture of feedback, then we create a culture of learning. And although these 3 baskets were important, the idea of gain the tohu and I will be great is not as important as the journey itself, because one of those baskets was all things known, and one of those baskets was all things not known. But the third basket, the most fabulous basket, is the basket of ceremonies and rituals that help us make sense of the seen and the unseen, the known and the unknown, the conscious and the unconscious. And we won't know those ceremonies and rituals if we are not together in our disagreement. I think I'm done. I could carry on all day, but I get stopped.
Please do.
Ngā mihi, nunui ki a koutou katoa. Koutou e whakarongo ana ki tēnei taonga, te timatanga o te ao, o te wahine, o te ira tangata, hine ahu one. Ngā mihi nunui ki a koutou katoa, kia ora.